On this week's show, we'll have an update on the latest Republican move to overhaul healthcare, plus news from Madison about lawmakers' efforts to agree on a plan to fix Wisconsin's roads. We'll also talk about What Happened to Us, an amazing project by columnist James Causey. We'll update the investigation into a death at the Milwaukee County Jail and Sheriff David Clarke's possible new job in the Trump administration. All that plus winners and losers and your questions today on JS on Politics. Welcome to JS on Politics. I'm your host, Mary Spacuzza. I spoke earlier today with Craig Gilbert, our Washington, D.C. bureau chief, about the latest Republican overhaul attempt of the Affordable Care Act. Here's that segment. I'm here now with Craig Gilbert, our Washington, D.C. bureau chief. Craig, where are you and what's going on?
So I'm standing in the Capitol, not too far from where House members are starting to vote, take procedural votes in advance of voting on final passage on the Republican health care bill, which should happen a little bit later today. It looks like the Republicans have the votes to narrowly pass this bill. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here right now. But there's quite a rush to get this done in advance of a 2-week recess. It's been on again, off again. It's been a huge struggle for Republicans, but as leery as a lot of Republicans are of this bill, I think they're even more leery of not passing anything, and they're under tremendous pressure from the White House to get this bill at least over to the U.S. Senate.
And where does the Wisconsin delegation stand on this?
Well, it looks like Wisconsin, like a lot of states, members are going to vote pretty much along party lines, Republicans in favor, Democrats against. We really haven't had any Wisconsin Republicans who have been like big, huge fence sitters on this bill. Some of them have been quiet, but there are members from other states, Republicans, who've been flip-flopping and who've been conspicuous critics of the bill. But this is the state where, House Speaker Paul Ryan is from. This is his baby. And so you can understand for those reasons alone why the Republican delegation would be sort of loyal to him on this, but it's obviously not without risk to his party.
Where does it go from here?
Well, I was just talking to Glenn Grothman about this, the Republican House member, the freshman Republican House member, who will vote for it, but pointed out that, this bill is going to undergo significant changes in the Senate, and then it's going to have to come back to the House. So whatever happens in the end, it's going to look different from what they're voting on today if it does get through the House. But it's going to take a different coalition to get a Republican majority in the House and the Senate than it took in the House. The bill's probably going to become less conservative and maybe more generous in some respects. And then the next test will be, if it does get through the Senate, whether House conservatives will go along with whatever changes the Senate has made.
This is obviously a controversial bill. What does it mean for Republicans politically?
Well, there are huge risks. I mean, one is that, the Congressional Budget Office hasn't scored this bill, hasn't scored the fiscal impact of this bill. So we know that the original bill had some very controversial implications in terms of fewer people being covered. And we know this bill is going to have some of the same issues. But it's been a moving target. So there could be some surprises in how this bill is scored by the CBO. And also, it's just, the original bill was not very popular. This bill is not a whole lot different. The Republicans are really caught between sort of two risks. One, the risk of really kind of demoralizing their base by doing nothing. And now the risk of alienating more moderate voters and people that just either have coverage through Obamacare or whose coverage could be affected negatively by this bill, even if they're not covered through Obamacare. So, it's a massive political step into the unknown by Republicans going into the 2018 midterm elections. And we'll know the answer to that question in November of next year.
Well, Craig, we know you're really busy. Thanks for taking the time out to give us an update.
All right. Stay tuned.
Thanks. Now I'm joined by Patrick Morley in Madison, who's out at the Capitol covering the state budget fight. Patrick, what's going on?
So this afternoon we're going to see the Assembly Republican plan. We've been reporting about it for the last 2 days, what they want to do with taxes and transportation. They haven't formally put it forward. They say they're going to do that at 2 p.m. in a news conference. This is a pretty big plan that would raise, that would apply the sales tax to gasoline, cut the gas tax that's currently imposed, get rid of the minimum markup law, that's minimum price that gas stations have to offer, make big changes to income taxes in future years, and change the wheel tax we just learned.
What's the response to that, Ben? I'm guessing Democrats aren't fans.
Well, the Democrats do not like this plan overall. They're frustrated. They're in the minority, obviously. They're frustrated that they've been left on the sidelines on it. They say that Republicans can't agree among themselves on transportation, and they should bring them in so that they can get something that could survive a veto from the governor. No sign at the moment of Republicans wanting to do this. It's interesting because the Republicans, the Assembly Republicans, I should say, the Senate, we don't know where they stand, but they've been doing a lot to reach out to stakeholders and various groups and do all kinds of things to get 50 or more of their members on board so they have a majority. The result of that is that a lot of details have leaked in the last 48 hours. So we've been putting this plan on the front page of the paper, but the Assembly Republicans really haven't been out there defending it. This will be their first chance to go out publicly, explain why they think this is the best plan, and sort of begin negotiations with the Senate.
What does this mean for Milwaukee?
So that's the newest twist that we've learned in this. Republicans in the legislature have been frustrated by wheel taxes and local governments turning to that as a revenue source. Milwaukee County, of course, passed one for $30 recently. This would allow no new wheel taxes anywhere in the state. Existing ones would get to stay in place, except for in Milwaukee County. They would rescind the $30 wheel tax that was imposed. That's about a $7 million cut this year to Milwaukee County, would amount to about $16 million next year. The Republicans, since we've just learned about this, Republicans in the Assembly have not explained yet why they think that Milwaukee's wheel tax should, Milwaukee County, I should say, that its wheel tax should be rescinded, but that other communities should be able to keep theirs. So the city of Milwaukee has a $20 wheel tax. That would remain in place, but the counties would go away.
Thanks, Patrick. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
I'm joined now in the studio by Jacob Carpenter, a reporter with the Journal Sentinel, and Daniel Weiss, columnist. There's been
Can I jump in on the very final
Sure,
part of that?
Go for it.
You know, it's interesting with the wheel tax that when the guys in Madison needed money for the Milwaukee Bucks arena, who did they turn to for the extra cash? To Milwaukee County. They said we need 40, and then they jumped to we need $60 million. Now they're sticking it to the Milwaukee County on the wheel tax. It's just
Friends on the arena, not so much on the wheel tax.
Sure. So
okay.
now let's talk Milwaukee County Jail.
Got it. So Jacob, you've been covering an unusual investigation into a death at the jail. What's the latest?
Well, we had a verdict that came from the inquest in the death of Terrell Thomas, who was the inmate that died of dehydration at the Milwaukee County Jail run by the Sheriff's Office. After 6 days of testimony, the jury in the inquest came back and said that there is probable cause to file charges against 7 people. That was a major, a lieutenant, and 5 corrections officers. This does not necessarily mean that charges will be filed. This is only an advisory verdict, and now it'll be up to District Attorney John Chisholm to decide whether he wants to go forward with charges.
And these were different people who had contact with Mr. Thomas during his time in the jail before he passed away.
Yeah, they were kind of divvied up into 3 parts. There were people who met with him, met with Terrell Thomas at the beginning and are alleged to be responsible for turning off his water. There were people at the tail end of his life in the last few hours who are believed to have not sought him help when he looked to be in distress. And then there's a major, Nancy Evans, who is believed to have kind of allowed these policies to take place involving water shutoffs. And that will be kind of the toughest charge, I think, to decide whether he wants to go forward with, whether the district attorney wants to go forward with that charge. But it is the highest ranking person that is among the 7.
And not Sheriff Clarke.
Well, she would be the closest one to Sheriff Clarke. Sheriff Clarke put her in that position, and Sheriff Clarke invented the title of major just for her. And she's had problems in the past, and Sheriff Clarke has stood up for her and supported her throughout all of that.
And he did not appear at the inquest, but is he facing criticism over what he's said and what he hasn't said about this?
He was not called to testify. I wouldn't expect him to face any charges, although the district attorney would not confirm one way or the other. He has faced criticism because he has not been very out in the public about his response to this. And as far as we know from the county records that we see, nobody's been fired, nobody has been demoted, nobody's been suspended for more than 10 days. He hasn't announced any policy changes. And in fact, his one kind of substantial comment so far was to point out that Terrell Thomas had been alleged to be involved in a violent crime just before his arrest, although his family says it was because of his mental illness.
He was bipolar.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so, there are people in the community, particularly those that are involved in mental health issues, that have spoken out and said that we need more transparency from the sheriff. The sheriff has only issued a very brief statement that essentially said that he would not comment during those proceedings. He issued a little bit more terse statement to us in which he asked if we were stupid for asking, but that's our job to ask, and there are those who want him to provide more answers.
Some say there are no stupid questions, but
you have to wonder if he's trying to run out the clock, essentially.
Well, you reported that he might get a job with the Trump administration.
We've been saying this for several months now, that there's a position that he's known about with the Trump administration to be basically a liaison to the law enforcement community. It's a job in Homeland Security, and it wouldn't require background. It wouldn't require a background check. It wouldn't require Senate confirmation. And since he's known this, he's been he's been actually schizophrenic on issues related to Trump. He talks a great deal. He tweets all the time.
Right.
Local issues like media stuff on the news, he communicates sporadically. But on the jail, almost nothing. I mean, what you said. He had the conversation with the medical examiner about another death at the jail, in which he attacked him privately, but he says almost nothing about what has gone on with the jail, or he's not stepped forward to defend Nancy Evans, which you would sort of expect him to do, since he appointed her to that position overseeing the jail. And in addition to all that, in his memoir, which just came out a couple months ago, he says the buck stops with him at the jail, plays up a great deal how he oversees the jail and what he does there.
That being said, there is an ongoing criminal investigation, and there are those who would say that it's best not to comment on those types of things. But that being said, most police officers in his position, they do speak publicly about events that have occurred, and there's not really a reason for him to not address at least some of these things.
And it's Sheriff Clarke. He does what he wants to do and says what he wants to say.
He's usually outspoken.
So, it's up to him.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for your time. I'm sure we'll be talking about the inquest and Sheriff Clarke again. So our colleague James Causey has been doing a project. I spoke to him earlier, but we wanted to show you a little bit of a video that we put together about him.
I grew up in Lincoln Creek, a great little neighborhood tucked just outside of Sherman Park. My neighborhood school was Samuel Clemens. I started there in 3rd grade. When we moved into this neighborhood, we were like the 4th black family to move in on my block on 39th and Free Branch. There was a melting pot, a mixture of so many different people. Everyone worked. That all changed when manufacturing started to decline. You started to see it in our schools, you started to see it in our neighborhood, you started to see it in houses not looking as nice as they once did, because people had to make a choice on feeding their families or getting a new fence put up or getting their house painted or getting a roof put on. One of the biggest changes that I witnessed in my community as well was the rise in crime. This used to be a neighborhood where you could walk at night and feel safe, but now I don't even walk at night. But one thing about it, they still love this neighborhood and they vow to fight and keep this neighborhood safe, and I'm going to fight along with them.
Now I'm here with James Causey, who's been working on an amazing project for Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. James, what's your project about?
Well, the project is focusing on me tracking down members from my third grade class from 1978. It's called What Happened to Us. And I'm trying to figure out what role like housing, incarceration, and employment played in our lives. And the project is very deep because it was 28 students in our class. My teacher was Marilyn Spicuzza, who was a relative of yours. And
Great family.
Great family. And what I really wanted to do was use 1978 for a couple of reasons. In 1978, my family moved from the 53206 zip code, where we were living as renters, to purchasing our first home on 39th and Capitol Drive. And it made it easier for me to walk to school, to Samuel Clemens Elementary School, which was just 3 blocks away. And I used 1978 for another reason, because there's this urban legend out there that prison officials use third grade reading scores to determine how many prison cells they need in the future. And so I wanted to see if that was true or not. And what I found is that while that may not necessarily be true, if students are not reading by grade level, by third grade, they tend to struggle more in school, and it's harder for them to catch up, and it can lead to other issues in the future.
And what did you learn during your project, either about your classmates or
I learned that I have amazing, I graduated with an amazing group of young people. A lot of them some had struggles. All of them persevered. I guess what I was surprised at is that they were impacted a lot by the condition that they lived in. You know, a lot of it didn't have anything to do with them, but there was a real dramatic shift in Milwaukee when it came to jobs. Our parents, 40% of black men worked in manufacturing in the 1970s. And we had a strong manufacturing base. A.O. Smith, which was one of the largest car frame manufacturers in the country, was just 6 blocks away from Samuel Clemens Elementary School. And a lot of our parents worked at companies like A.O. Smith. And by the time we graduated, my classmates graduated from high school, roughly in 1987, those jobs were just about all gone. So it was a tough time for us, because we had to figure out, well, these jobs that allowed our parents to buy homes and to put away for our savings and do all these kind of things, those jobs don't really exist anymore. So what do we do? Some of us still tried to get in those jobs and were successful, but a lot of us had to find our own way in various ways, shapes, or forms. One of my students became an entrepreneur. Some went to the Army. So it really goes into really different ways of how we tried to make it.
How hopeful are you that Milwaukee can turn things around? Obviously, it's been tough in some of these years since 1978.
Well, we have to turn things around. Let's start there. And there's examples in other cities that are just like us, where they were in similar positions where they actually did turn things around. For instance, in Cleveland, Cleveland has similar demographics to us. They lost a large number of manufacturing jobs. So what they wanted to do, they focused on the leaders there, they called on the anchor institution, the institution that can't leave, the hospitals, the schools, and said, how can you be a part of the solution? So the anchor institutions, over a period of 2 years, said, we're going to use our purchasing power, our $3 billion worth of purchasing power that we use to get our laundry done, that we use for food and all these other kind of things, to put that money into people who need it the most. So they bought 3 businesses, purchased 3 businesses, a laundry, a Evergreen, and a solar panel facility. And what they did is they started hiring people from these impoverished neighborhoods to put them to work.
Well, a lot of people have been talking about it and praising your project, so I can't wait to see what comes next. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm back with Dan Bice for everybody's favorite winners and losers. Dan, who's your winner this week?
My winners are UW-Madison students. Charles Murray, the controversial author who's written some provocative books about race. and it was funded in part for his book, The Bell Curve, by the Bradley Foundation. He spoke in Madison, and the response here was nothing like the response in Middlebury College, where things got violent, and one of the professors he was with ended up in the hospital, and so forth, just because the students disagreed with some of what he had to say. Here, there was very little. There were a few protesters, 100 protesters or so, but there was nothing violent or anything like that. And I'm not sure if it's because they were less well organized, or they were apathetic, or they just were incompetent. But still, the response was nothing like Middlebury or the situation where Ann Coulter was shut down at UC Berkeley or any of the other places.
Milo wasn't welcomed at UC Berkeley much either.
But Milo appeared here, and and there were protesters and so forth, and he said some outrageous stuff, and he had an attack on a particular student. But again, the response was not. It was not violent.
No violence, right?
Yeah, there was no violence, and it wasn't disruptive either. More what you would expect a college campus to do.
What about losers?
Losers is an easy one. We've already talked about it with Jacob.
Right.
The personnel at the jail, who oversee the jail, and Sheriff Clarke, who oversees them. And as I said earlier, in his memoir, he says the buck stops with him on the jail. Except for apparently when there are major problems, he tends to disappear.
And it's not, he's normally so outspoken that it's interesting.
And he is outspoken on certain subjects.
Right.
If something happens, I'm sure he has strong opinions about the repeal and replace of Obamacare, but on local issues, not so much.
All right. Well, thank you. We got a bunch of viewer questions, and they're all coming to you.
Great. Well, you can give your own opinions too.
I can chime in. Sure. All right. One is from John Casper.
John, one of our favorite viewers.
He says odds that David Clarke completes his term as sheriff. What do you think?
I think it's slim. I wouldn't say none. Actually, Ernell Lucas, a former captain with the Milwaukee Police Department, decided to run, and I've actually heard some suggested stories and stuff critical of Lucas, which would make you think that Sheriff Clarke's supporters still think that there might be a race, and I might be writing something soon on some of that. So
he's indicated it would be unlikely that he would pass up a job with the Trump administration, hasn't he?
He has said that, and it sounds like a ideal job, this liaison position or assistant secretary at Homeland Security, because he wouldn't have to go through a confirmation hearing, which might be tough. I assume he would
certainly
pass,
been provocative and controversial, and there would be lots of.
He wants to be that way, and so you sort of have to live with who you are. But and I don't know if he has to. I would assume he'd have to move from here to go to Washington, Yeah, so I don't think it's likely. I've also heard from other people who said he doesn't really want to run for office again. And it is grueling. And 2014 race was really tough. And he told me right after that race that it was the only time in his life that he's been politically scared that he was actually going to lose. And a lot of money was spent. I'm guessing a lot of money would be spent if it's a Lucas versus Clarke primary next year.
What did Mayor Barrett said? He rode his horse out of town a long time ago. Was that one of the criticisms of him? So
it shows up from time to time, particularly, he was, last week he was tweeting about various local things, and then he heads off to the NRA convention to give a speech in the middle of this inquest at the jail. So he's certainly unpredictable on many things.
We got a number of questions about some of the reception of controversial speakers on college campuses. We're not going to get a chance to get to all of them, but here's one from Delaney. I thought universities wanted diversity. Don't they want to listen to other people's views?
Anytime there's a controversial speaker that, you should expect some sort of disagreement. In fact, that's a good thing. When people call and yell and scream at me, I generally tell them I much prefer you do that than ignore what I'm writing and not have an opinion. And so
people call and scream at you. That's so hard to believe.
People call and scream at you too. So
that's true.
But I tell them all the time. That doesn't bother me, and I don't mind hostile emails. It's something I sort of enjoy, and it's something that is a disconnect for me because I don't understand getting violent or not wanting to hear someone's opinion. I enjoy going to lectures. I enjoy hearing people who disagree with what I think on things. So I understand the person's point. I've got 3 kids in college, and I know that there's a lot of resistance to hearing certain voices. And at a certain point, you have to wonder, should college resources be spent on some of these? Because many of the speakers are using
paid,
college, are paid speakers, and Coulter is not free. So, I mean, that's a different issue. Do you want a neo-Nazi receiving possibly state money to give a speech on campus? That's a different thing, and I think that shifts from being a speech issue, a First Amendment issue, to one about the propriety and the use of state dollars.
It was really interesting with Milo because he was getting a lot of defense from the campus Republicans at UC Berkeley and others when he was, violently received. But then after some of his comments,
not
then
so
not as much.
yeah.
It was a little quieter.
Well, I mean, he's again a provocateur, and so he's saying stuff that, I mean, it's very dangerous to align yourself with someone like him.
Right, because he's going to say something at some point that's, yeah.
And with Charles Murray, his personality is not, and he made the point yesterday when he was speaking, I'm not Ann Coulter. I don't really enjoy all this attention. I'm assuming he gets paid, and he probably enjoys that. But
the money, not the attention.
Right. He said he's not out about getting, being provocative. And I think
it's like Ann Coulter, the worst thing you can do to her is ignore her, because then it's...
Right. And in fact, I think for a college campus, there's a question as to whether having someone like Ann Coulter come and speak actually contributes very much, because she's not a scholar. She doesn't pretend to be a scholar. She is someone who wants to provoke. And I guess in certain cases there's value to that. I like to provoke from time to time, but she's not somebody Charles Murray actually writes lengthy books, does scholarship. You might disagree with his conclusions, particularly on the intelligence of African Americans. But he is someone who is actually working on a college campus doing real academic work.
I'm sure your rates are cheaper than Ann Coulter's.
Probably.
So this one comes from about Hillary, and they say, I'm not going to ask the whole questions because it's pretty long, and it's also from Frank on the second shift, who writes to us pretty frequently. Hi, Frank. It says, basically talks about Hillary Clinton and says that she's mocking Trump because he wants to meet with the heads of states of countries. I'm guessing he's talking about countries like North Korea, the Philippines. But are you surprised that Hillary Clinton keeps popping up and making comments and doing appearances, or what do you think?
I didn't know what to think, whether she would disappear or not. Are you surprised?
It's interesting because not really. I think often when somebody loses, they kind of fade out of the public view, but she's kind of been in the public view for so long, it's like it would be hard for her to just completely vanish.
This is completely different from the question, which is
sure.
somewhat tedious, but did you see David Axelrod yesterday saying that she's sort of spreading the blame pretty far in terms of why she lost this race?
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of people have kind of looked at Comey and thought that some of his comments right before the election were harmful to her campaign, but it seems different to hear it from the candidate herself.
Also, her campaign made a lot of mistakes. When we get to see it up close and personal here in Wisconsin, where she was here late in March and we never saw her again.
Not as up close and personal.
And the Huffington Post story indicates they knew the race got really close here, but they didn't want to come here because it would let the other side know that the race was close here, which seems to be overthinking the situation.
Trump was coming a lot.
It seems like there are many, many internal problems with the Clinton campaign, and so I think Axelrod's probably right on that, and it's interesting that he's the one to call her out on that. In terms of dealing with international stuff, I mean, it is true she does know a lot about dealing with international figures. The concern, I think, is to legitimize some of these people. And another concern is when Donald Trump talks to somebody, particularly a foreign leader, not so much the media, but the foreign leader, he tends to come around and agree or feel like, wow, the situation in North Korea is more complicated than I thought, or, frankly, you get the sense on some of these things that he doesn't have very much of a familiarity. And
can be unpredictable about what he says and how the exchange goes with whether it's a friend
and
these
things are it's a high wire act. So I mean, you can commit mistakes and make serious errors in dealing with, people like the head of North Korea or the Philippines. So I understand the concern.
We're out of time for today, but thanks for sticking around.
Sure.
And talk to you soon.
Okay.